$5,000 a month. One raised bed, 100 square feet. No greenhouse, no acreage, no truck backed up the driveway once a week. From the sidewalk, it looks like someone who really likes tomatoes. What is actually growing in that 100 square feet is 5 separate income systems running at the same time, stacked into a footprint smaller than a 2-car garage, each one quietly feeding the next. And the system that earns the most doesn't grow a single vegetable. Before we go anywhere, subscribe and hit the bell. This channel publishes one complete plot system every single week. Miss one video and you miss how the pieces actually connect to each other. And here's what nobody tells you before we start. These 5 systems do not just sit side by side in the dirt. They share infrastructure, they share waste streams, and by the time we reach the 5th one, your costs are falling while your combined output keeps climbing. That is not an accident. That is the design. Real growers, real numbers, no theory. Let's step inside the bed. Before the first system, you need to understand why 100 square feet can do this at all. Because the instinct most people have is that small means small money. That instinct is wrong, and it's wrong for a specific reason. The plot on this list isn't selling volume. It's selling scarcity, timing, and genetics. 3 things that don't require acreage. Walk past a 100 square foot bed and you see rows. What you don't see is that 4 of the 5 things growing in it are priced by the gram, by the rhizome, or by the reputation of the seller, not by the pound. A commodity farmer needs 40 acres to make real money because commodity crops are priced at pennies per pound. A plot grower selling saffron threads, seed-grade garlic, or hop rhizomes is playing an entirely different game. And the game doesn't scale with land. It scales with precision. Every system on this list was chosen against 2 hard criteria. First, it has to generate verifiable income from a real grower, not a hypothetical one. Second, it has to fit inside 100 square feet without fighting the other systems for space, sunlight, or water. If it failed either test, it got cut. 5 systems made it. Let's start at the corner that costs the most to plant and pays for everything else. System 1. The corner that costs the most on purpose. System 1 lives in a 3 by 3 foot corner, costs more upfront than anything else on this list, and it's placed first for a reason you'll understand by the time we get to System 5. Saffron corms. Income range, $500 to $800 a month. Startup, $150 to $300. Time commitment, 15 minutes a day during a 6-week harvest window. Almost nothing the rest of the year. Saffron comes from the stigma of the Crocus sativus flower. 3 thin red threads picked by hand from the center of each bloom. It is, gram for gram, the most expensive spice grown anywhere in the world. And the reason has nothing to do with rarity of the plant, and everything to do with the labor. It takes somewhere around 150 flowers, hand-picked, to produce 1 gram of dried threads. That labor cost is exactly what keeps big commercial agriculture out of this crop, and keeps the door wide open for a grower with 100 square feet and patience. A 3 by 3 bed, planted densely with corms, spaced properly, can hold well over 200 bulbs. Each bulb produces 1 to 4 flowers during a narrow bloom window in early fall, and each flower gives up its 3 threads the same morning it opens. You are not tending this bed all season. You are showing up for roughly 6 weeks, at dawn, picking flowers before the sun softens the threads and drops their potency. Picture a grower outside Boise, Idaho, running exactly this setup. A raised corner bed, corms ordered from a specialty bulb supplier 2 years earlier, now multiplying on their own. She sells dried threads by the half gram and gram in small glass vials, direct to 3 restaurants that put saffron on a seasonal menu, and to a short list of home cooks who found her through a farmer's market table. She sets up exactly twice a year, during and right after harvest. Her price point sits well above what a grocery store jar charges, because a grocery store jar is usually cut, old, or both, and chefs know the difference the moment they open a fresh vial. Her numbers land consistently in the $500 to $800 range across the harvest season, averaged out monthly. Her only real cost after the initial corms is time, and the time is concentrated into 6 mornings a week for 6 weeks. not spread thin across the whole year. Startup here is genuinely the steepest entry point in this entire plot. $150 to $300 for quality corms from a reputable bulb source. That's more than the other four systems combined. It's placed first deliberately, because you want that cost behind you, while the rest of the plot is still cheap to build, not stacked on top of four other startup costs in your first season. The biggest mistake, and it costs growers a full season of income, is harvesting too late. Saffron threads lose potency by the hour once a flower opens, not by the day. A flower that opens at dawn and gets picked at dawn gives you full-strength thread. The same flower picked at noon has already lost a meaningful percentage of its aromatic compounds to the sun. The fix costs nothing except discipline. Pick at first light every single morning of the bloom window. No exceptions. No sleeping in during harvest season. And here's the part that connects to everything coming after it. Saffron corms are not an annual purchase. Left in the ground, healthy corms multiply underground every single year, splitting into new bulbs on their own. The bed you plant this year is smaller than the bed you'll be harvesting from in 3 years, without spending another dollar on stock. You planted an asset that grows itself. Keep that idea in your head, because the last system on this list runs on the exact same principle, just faster. There's a second layer to this economics that most people never think about, which is dormancy. Saffron crocus is a fall-blooming plant, meaning the bed that's producing your highest margin product in October is sitting completely dormant, visually unremarkable, for the rest of the year. To anyone walking past in June, it looks like an empty patch of dirt or a bed of ordinary green foliage, not a four-figure asset waiting for autumn. That dormancy is actually part of what makes this system so easy to run alongside four others. It asks nothing of you and nothing of the plot's limited square footage for roughly 10 months out of 12. The labor and the payoff are both compressed into a narrow, predictable window, which means you can plan your entire year around it instead of it competing for your attention every week, like the other systems on this list. The drying and storage side matters just as much as the picking. Fresh-picked threads have to be dried quickly and gently, typically over low, indirect heat for a short window, then stored in an airtight, light-blocking container. Saffron that's dried too fast scorches and loses aroma. Dried too slow, it can mold before it ever reaches a jar. Growers who take the time to dial in a consistent low-heat drying method, whether that's a dehydrator on its lowest setting or a warm, dark room with good airflow, end up with a product that holds its color and potency for years in storage, which means a strong harvest year can be sold gradually across the following 12 months, instead of dumped all at once into a market that can't absorb it. That's the foundation laid, and it's the only system in this plot where the biggest cost comes on day one instead of trickling in over the season. Everything from here gets cheaper to start. System 2, the crop nobody's actually eating, System 2, goes in a single dedicated row, and the entire economics of it hinge on one distinction almost nobody outside the growing world understands. Hardneck garlic, grown for seed, not for the table. Income range, $600 to $900 a month. Startup, $80 to $150. Here's the distinction that changes everything. Culinary garlic, the kind sold in a mesh bag at a grocery store, is priced like a vegetable, a few dollars a pound. Seed garlic, bulbs specifically grown, selected, and sold to other growers to plant as next year's crop, is priced like breeding stock, because that's exactly what it is. A buyer purchasing seed garlic isn't paying for calories. They're paying for disease-free genetics, proper curing, and a variety that performs well in their specific climate. That buyer will pay 3 to 5 times what a culinary buyer pays for the identical-looking bulb. A single 100-square-foot row, planted with hardneck varieties in the fall, produces a genuinely useful quantity of bulbs by the following summer. Hardneck garlic is preferred by serious growers over softneck because it tends to produce larger, more uniform cloves and stronger regional adaptation, which is exactly the kind of detail a seed buyer cares about and a grocery shopper never thinks about. The buyer profile here is narrow and repeat-driven in a way most crops aren't. You are not selling to the general public. You are selling to other small farms and home growers who need seed stock every single fall. which means once you land a buyer, you tend to keep them. A grower who buys 3 pounds of your seed garlic this October is very likely buying again next October, because good seed garlic sources are genuinely hard to find and growers talk to each other. There's a seed garlic grower outside Bozeman, Montana, running this exact model on a single long row. She built a small mailing list over 2 seasons, mostly other backyard and market growers who found her through a local seed swap and a gardening forum thread. Every September, she sends one email announcing her seed garlic is ready, and most of her inventory sells within the first week, before it's even fully cured, on reservation. Her monthly average, spread across the growing and curing cycle, lands consistently in the $600 to $900 range. Startup is modest, $80 to $150 for quality seed-grade stock to begin your own bed, since you have to start with good genetics to sell good genetics forward. The mistake that quietly kills a seed garlic operation in its first year is selling everything you grow. It's tempting, especially when a buyer wants more than you plan to sell. But the entire model depends on holding back your best bulbs, the biggest, cleanest, most disease-free specimens from this year's harvest, to replant as next year's seed stock. Sell all of it and you've got nothing to plant come fall, and you're buying seed stock again instead of growing your own. The fix is simple and non-negotiable. Reserve the top 15% of your harvest before a single bulb goes to a customer, no matter how good the offer. And here's a detail almost nobody selling culinary garlic bothers to mention. Hardneck varieties send up a curling flower stalk in early summer, called a scape, and cutting it off is actually required, because leaving it on redirects the plant's energy into the flower instead of the bulb. Most growers either discard scapes or eat them themselves. A seed grower with the right buyer list sells them as a second product entirely. A garlicky, mild green, sold in small bundles to the same chef contacts who might also be buying saffron from System 1. 1 bed, 2 harvests, 2 separate buyers. And the second one is functionally free, since you were cutting the scapes anyway. There's also a quality signal in seed garlic that culinary buyers never think about, and it's the reason repeat customers stay loyal instead of shopping around every year. Seed-grade bulbs need to be certified, or at minimum verifiably disease-free, because the single fastest way to wreck a serious grower's reputation is selling stock that turns out to carry a soil-borne fungal issue into someone else's field. Growers who take the extra step of testing or sourcing certified disease-free starter stock and who cure their bulbs properly in a dry, well-ventilated space for several weeks before shipping build a reputation inside grower circles that a random online seller never gets close to. That reputation is worth more than any single sale, because seed buyers talk to each other constantly, at seed swaps, in online growing forums, at extension office workshops, and a bad batch sold once can quietly end a seed business before it starts, while a good batch sold once tends to generate 2 or 3 referrals the following season without you doing any additional marketing at all. Timing the harvest correctly also plays directly into your margin. Garlic pulled too early has underdeveloped cloves that don't cure well and don't store through a full seed-selling season. Garlic left in the ground too long begins to split its papery wrapper, which makes it far more vulnerable to soil pathogens during the curing process and drastically shortens its shelf life. The window for a correctly timed harvest is narrow, usually signaled by the lower leaves on the plant browning while the upper leaves stay green. And growers who watch that signal closely, instead of harvesting on a fixed calendar date, consistently end up with a higher percentage of bulbs that make the seed grade cut, instead of getting downgraded to culinary pricing. System 3. Growing color instead of food. System 3 occupies a border row along one edge of the plot, and it exists because of a hobby that's grown fast enough over the last several years that the supply side genuinely hasn't caught up with demand yet. Natural dye plants. Income range, $500 to $800 a month. Startup, $60 to $120. Indigo, madder, and marigold. 3 plants, planted in the same border row, each producing a completely different color family. Deep blue, warm red, and golden yellow. For the fiber arts and slow fashion hobbyist market that's exploded across Etsy, fiber guilds, and small batch textile studios over the last several years, as more people move away from synthetic dyes toward plant-based ones for hand-spun wool, quilting cotton, and small batch clothing lines. The product here isn't the plant. It's what the plant becomes in a buyer's hands. You're selling fresh-cut dye bundles, ready to simmer into a dye bath, and small extract kits, pre-processed concentrated dye powder or paste that a hobbyist can use without doing the extraction work themselves. The extract kits carry the higher margin because you've done the labor-intensive part and the buyer is paying for the convenience. A single border row, maybe 2 feet wide and running the length of the plot, holds enough of all 3 plants to produce a steady weekly harvest through the growing season. Indigo in particular needs to be processed relatively quickly after cutting to preserve pigment, so this isn't a crop you harvest once and forget. It's a rhythm: cut and process on a schedule, sell in small batches continuously rather than one big harvest. Picture a grower outside Asheville, North Carolina, an area with an unusually dense population of fiber artists and small textile studios. She runs this exact 3-plant border, selling fresh bundles at a monthly fiber guild meeting and extract kits through a small online shop, with a customer base built almost entirely by word of mouth inside that guild community. Her products show up in other members' hand-spun yarn and quilting projects, and those finished pieces become her best advertising without her doing anything extra. Her monthly average sits comfortably in the $500 to $800 range, with extract kits pulling a meaningfully higher margin per hour of labor than the fresh bundles. Startup is low, $60 to $120 for seed and basic drying or processing equipment, a mesh drying rack and some jars being most of it. The mistake that cuts pigment yield in half, and it's an easy one to make because it isn't obvious, is harvesting at the wrong maturity stage. Indigo needs to be cut for pigment extraction at peak leaf density, right before the plant flowers, not after. Once it flowers, the plant redirects its energy away from leaf growth, and the pigment concentration in the leaves drops noticeably. A grower who waits to harvest until the plant looks fuller and more impressive is actually harvesting a weaker product. The fix is watching the calendar and the plant closely and cutting before flowering starts, even when the plant doesn't look like it's ready by casual appearance. And this is where the stacking starts to show itself. Every dye plant produces waste, stems, spent leaves after extraction, and plant material that doesn't make the cut for a bundle or kit. None of that gets thrown away. It goes straight into the same compost pile that's about to become the highest earning system on this entire list, feeding a process that turns 3 systems worth of plant waste into the 5th income stream. The 3-plant combination here isn't arbitrary. Indigo, madder, and marigold were chosen specifically because they cover the 3 color families that show up most often in a fiber artist's project list: blue, red, and yellow, which means a single buyer working on one project might need all 3 from the same seller instead of sourcing each color from a different grower. That's a meaningfully different sales dynamic than a single crop system, because it turns a one-time buyer into someone placing a larger combined order, and it gives you 3 separate harvest and processing rhythms spread across the growing season instead of one single harvest crunch. Marigold flowers can be picked continuously through summer as they bloom. Madder root needs a full season or more to develop real pigment concentration before it's dug, and indigo sits somewhere in between, cut for leaf pigment multiple times across the warm months if managed well. Extract kits deserve a closer look because they're where the real margin lives. A fresh dye bundle is a low-effort, lower-price product, essentially selling the raw plant material and letting the buyer do the extraction work themselves. An extract kit means you've already done the simmering, straining, and reducing down to a concentrated paste or powder, shelf-stable and ready to use without the buyer needing a dedicated dye pot or a full afternoon free. That convenience commands a real premium, often several times the price of the equivalent fresh bundle, because you've converted your own labor hours into a shelf-stable product that a hobbyist with a busy week will pay extra to avoid doing themselves. Growers who split their harvest between quick fresh bundle sales for immediate cash flow and batched extract kit production for higher margin tend to smooth out their income across the season instead of living harvest to harvest. System 4. Growing straight up instead of out. System 4 is different from everything before it because it doesn't compete for a single square foot of ground. It goes vertical, straight up a fence line, which means you add an entire fourth income system to a 100 square foot plot without giving up any bed space at all. Loofah gourds. Income range, $600 to $1,000 a month. Startup, $50 to $100. Most people who've seen a loofah sponge have no idea it's a vegetable. Loofah aegyptiaca is a vining gourd, closely related to cucumbers and squash, and when it's allowed to grow fully mature and dry on the vine, the fibrous interior becomes the exact same natural bath sponge sold in skincare stores for $8 to $15 a piece. The plant grows aggressively along a trellis or fence, needs almost no ground footprint, and produces gourds that require essentially zero processing equipment, just curing, peeling, and cleaning. This is a genuinely underexploited niche inside the broader natural skincare and eco-conscious product market. Buyers actively looking for plastic-free bath and body products are a growing, motivated group, and a hand-grown, imperfect-looking loofah sponge actually sells better into that market than a uniform commercial one, because the imperfection reads as authentic. A single fence line along one edge of the 100 square foot plot, trellised properly, can support a dense planting of vines that produces dozens of gourds across a season. Each mature, dried, cleaned loofah sells individually, and a grower can also cut larger ones into smaller bath mitt-sized pieces for a different price point, which stretches the yield further without any extra plants. There's a grower outside Knoxville, Tennessee, running vines up a plain wire fence that used to be bare. She sells finished loofahs through a small online shop and at a monthly farmer's market table, priced individually with a small premium for the largest, most uniform pieces and a lower price point for the smaller cut pieces sold in bundles of 3. Her monthly average lands in the $600 to $1,000 range depending on the season, since the bulk of her harvest cures and sells across late summer into fall. Startup is minimal, $50 to $100 for trellis material if it isn't already in place, and seed. The mistake that ruins an entire harvest, and it happens constantly with first-time growers, is picking the gourds green. A loofah has to be left on the vine until it's fully mature and the skin has turned brown and papery, and it will actually rattle slightly when you shake it, a sign the fibrous interior has separated from the outer skin. Pick it green, thinking you're getting ahead of the season, and you end up with a soft, unusable gourd with no sponge structure inside. The fix is patience. Leave it on the vine until the skin is fully dry and brittle, then bring it inside to cure for another 2 weeks before peeling. And here's the connection that makes System 4 nearly free to add to this plot. The vertical trellis it needs is the exact same infrastructure the next and final system requires. You're not building a second structure. You're planting a second vine on a fence line you already built, which means System 5 adds income to this plot, with essentially no new construction cost at all. The processing side of loofah is worth walking through in more detail, because it's genuinely the entire barrier keeping most people out of this market, despite how easy the plant is to grow. A mature dried gourd has a tough outer skin that needs to be peeled away, followed by a rinse and squeeze cycle to remove the seeds and any remaining pulp from inside the fibrous structure, and finally, a soak, sometimes in a mild bleach solution or hydrogen peroxide dilution, to lighten the fiber and eliminate any lingering odor before it's fully dried and packaged. None of these steps require special equipment. A 5-gallon bucket, a sink, and a drying rack handle the entire process. But most home gardeners who grow a loofah vine as a novelty never learn this sequence, which is exactly why finished, properly processed loofah sponges command a real retail price instead of being treated as a garden curiosity. Sizing and grading also matter more than new growers expect. A single vine produces gourds of noticeably different sizes and shapes across a season. And rather than treating that as a problem, An organized seller turns it into a simple tiered product line. The largest, most uniform gourds sell whole at the top price point, ideal for use as a full-body sponge. Medium gourds get sold whole at a slightly lower price. And anything undersized, oddly shaped, or slightly damaged during curing gets cut into smaller bath mitt or facial pad-sized pieces and bundled in threes, which means almost nothing from a season's harvest goes to waste. And a buyer browsing a shop sees a full range of price points instead of a single take-it-or-leave-it product. System 5. The one that grows itself richer every year. System 5 earns more than any other system on this list, and I saved it for last on purpose, because understanding how it works requires understanding everything you just watched about the corms in System 1. Before I tell you what it is, sit with this number, because it sounds like a typo the first time you hear it. A single perennial plant, grown once and never repurchased, can generate the highest monthly income on this entire 100-square-foot plot, and it does it by selling almost nothing but its own roots. Hops rhizomes. Income range: $900 to $1,500 a month. Startup: $100 to $200. Here's the part that surprises almost everyone. This isn't about selling hops as a brewing ingredient, the dried cones used to flavor beer. It's about selling the plant itself, specifically the rhizomes, root cuttings taken from an established hop plant, to homebrewers who want to grow their own hop vines in their own backyards. Homebrewing has grown into a large, dedicated hobbyist community, and a meaningful share of serious homebrewers eventually want to grow their own hops rather than buying dried cones every season. The problem they run into is that hop rhizomes are only viable for planting during a narrow window in early spring, right before the growing season starts, and a healthy, viable rhizome has to come from an already established plant, not a first-year seedling. That narrow window, combined with limited supply from established growers, is exactly what drives the premium price. The same vertical trellis, holding your loofah vines on the opposite side, supports a hop vine, planted once as a perennial. Unlike the gourds, you're not replanting this every year. A hop plant, once established, sends up new growth from its root system every single spring, and that root system spreads and thickens with every passing season. By year 2 or 3, a single healthy plant has grown enough of a root mass that you can divide off multiple viable rhizome cuttings without damaging the parent plant at all. This is the exact same principle as the saffron corms in System 1, just compressed into a faster cycle. You are not restocking a product you sell. You're selling pieces of an asset that keeps expanding on its own, for free, every year, whether you harvest from it or not. There's a grower outside Portland, Oregon, an area with an unusually dense home brewing culture, running a single established hop vine up a repurposed fence trellis. Every early spring, during roughly a 3-week window, she divides and ships rhizome cuttings to home brewers who pre-order through a small online listing that opens once a year and typically sells out within days. Because the supply window is so narrow and demand from the local brewing community is consistent. Her per rhizome price sits well above what a beginner might expect for what is, physically, just a piece of root. But that price reflects genuine scarcity, not markup. There simply aren't many established growers dividing and selling rhizomes in any given region, and the ones who do tend to sell out fast. Her seasonal totals, averaged across the months leading into and through that harvest window, land consistently in the $900 to $1,500 range, making this single perennial plant the highest earner in the entire plot. Startup is $100 to $200 for initial rhizomes to establish the parent plant, a genuinely modest cost given what it becomes. The mistake that costs growers an entire season of income is dividing and selling rhizomes too early, before the root system has had time to fully establish. A rhizome cut from a plant in its first year is often too small and underdeveloped to reliably take root in a buyer's yard. And a buyer who plants a rhizome that fails to establish doesn't come back next year, and worse, tells other home brewers not to buy from you. The fix requires patience that pays off enormously. Don't divide or sell a single rhizome until the plant has completed at least 2 full growing seasons. After that, the root system is developed enough to divide repeatedly without weakening the parent plant, and every division you take just makes room for the next season's root mass to expand even further. And this is the detail that ties the entire plot together. Like the saffron corms at the very beginning of this list, hops rhizomes aren't something you keep buying. They're something you grow once and harvest from indefinitely. A root system that gets more valuable every single year without a single additional dollar of input. The plot doesn't just produce income. Parts of it are quietly compounding, becoming worth more next spring than they're worth right now, for doing absolutely nothing except staying in the ground. Variety selection matters enormously here, more than in almost any other system on this list, because home brewers aren't buying hops the way a grocery shopper buys tomatoes. They're buying a specific variety for a specific beer style, and different varieties carry meaningfully different reputations and price points inside the brewing community. A grower who plants one of the more sought-after aromatic varieties, the kind regularly out of stock from the handful of commercial rhizome suppliers that serve the home market, positions themselves to sell out faster and command a stronger price than a grower who planted whatever was cheapest or most available. This is worth researching before you ever put a rhizome in the ground, because the variety you choose in year one determines your pricing ceiling for every year after. The harvest and shipping window deserves its own attention too, because it's genuinely the tightest timing constraint of any system in this plot. Rhizomes have to be dug while the plant is still dormant, before new spring growth has fully emerged, and they need to reach a buyer and go into the ground quickly once dug, since a rhizome sitting out of soil for too long loses viability fast. That means this isn't a system where you can process orders at your own leisurely pace. Growers who run this well treat the harvest window like a real deadline, digging in batches, wrapping cuttings in damp material immediately, and shipping same day or next day, rather than letting orders sit. The tightness of that window is exactly why so few growers offer rhizomes at all, and exactly why the ones who do it reliably build a waiting list that only grows year over year. So let's add it up, because this is the part that should make you sit forward. Saffron corms, 500 to 800. Seed garlic, 600 to 900. Natural dye plants, 500 to 800. Loofah gourds, 600 to 1,000. Hops rhizomes, 900 to 1,500. Run all five at the top of their range, and you're standing at exactly $5,000 a month, out of 100 square feet that from the sidewalk looks like somebody who takes their garden a little too seriously. But the total isn't the real story. The real story is that these 5 systems aren't 5 separate crops planted next to each other. They're 5 parts of one design, and the connections are where the real value quietly compounds. Trace the loop. The saffron corner and the hops trellis are both perennial systems that multiply their own rootstock every year, meaning 2 of your 5 income streams get more valuable on their own, without you spending another dollar on them, just by existing another season. The garlic row produces 2 separate products from one planting: bulbs for the fall seed market and scapes for the same chef contacts buying your saffron, so one bed serves 2 buyer relationships at once. The dye plant border and the garlic tops that don't make the cut for sale become the raw material feeding a compost system that returns finished, nutrient-rich soil straight back onto every other bed in the plot, meaning your highest cost inputs, soil amendment and fertility, trend towards zero the longer the plot runs. And the loofah vines and the hop vine share a single piece of trellis infrastructure, so the 4th and 5th systems on this list required building exactly 1 fence line, not 2. That's the design logic. Costs that fall as the plot matures. Outputs that climb without adding new square footage. Waste from one system becoming the input for another. Nothing on this list was picked at random. Each system does a job for the others, and that's the difference between 5 side hustles that exhaust you and 1 quiet plot that runs itself. There's also a seasonal rhythm hidden inside this stack that's worth pointing out, because it's the reason the plot doesn't demand equal attention year-round. The hops rhizomes and garlic scapes both peak in early spring. Loofah harvest and dye plant cutting run through the heart of summer into early fall. Saffron picking is compressed into a narrow autumn window, and garlic planting happens right alongside it, in the fall, closing the annual loop. Instead of 5 systems all asking for your attention during the same 8-week stretch, the way a lot of side hustle advice assumes things will work, the harvest windows are naturally staggered across the calendar. That staggering is not a coincidence. It's the same design principle at work again. 100 square feet cannot support 5 systems all demanding intensive labor simultaneously. So the systems that made this list were chosen partly because their busy seasons don't collide. And every one of these 5 products shares a customer overlap that compounds in the same quiet way the physical systems do. A chef buying your saffron is exactly the kind of buyer who also wants your garlic scapes in the same delivery. A fiber artist buying dye extract kits is statistically likely to know other fiber artists, quilters, and hand spinners who become referrals without you spending $1 on advertising. A home brewer who successfully grows out a hop rhizome you sold them is the same person who mentions your name the next time a fellow brewer at a homebrew club meeting asks where to source rhizomes. You are not building 5 separate customer lists from scratch. You're building a handful of small, tightly connected buyer communities that reinforce each other the longer the plot runs. If you're sitting there feeling like 5 systems at once is too much, good, because you should never start with 5. Start with the garlic row. It's the cheapest entry point after the dye plants. It's planted in fall and mostly left alone until summer, and it teaches you the single most important discipline on this entire list: holding back your best stock instead of selling everything you grow. Get that habit right on a low-stakes crop before you're relying on it for saffron corms or hop rhizomes. Once the garlic bed is established and you've got your first seed customers, add the dye plant border. It's cheap, it's forgiving, and it starts feeding your compost pile immediately, which you'll want running well before you're relying on finished compost to keep the more expensive systems healthy. From there, branch into the loofah vines, since the trellis you build for them becomes the same trellis the hops will eventually use. Let that fence line earn its keep for a season or two before adding the hop vine on the opposite side. Save the saffron corner and the hop planting for once the plot has some rhythm to it, because both of them ask for patience before they pay anything back, and patience is easier to give once you've already got other systems generating income and proving the model works. That's how 100 square feet becomes a $5,000 machine without ever feeling like a second job. Now I want something from you, and it takes 10 seconds. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 5 surprised you the most. Not the highest earner, the one you didn't expect to see on a list like this at all. I read every comment, and the ones that surprise the most people are the ones that get the deepest breakdowns next, so your answer genuinely shapes what gets built here. There's also a free 1-page cheat sheet in the description with every system, every income range, and every startup cost laid out in one place, so grab that before you forget. And if you got a number out of this video you can't find anywhere else, subscribe and turn on the bell, because this is the only channel laying the whole plot out system by system with the real math behind it. The quiet 100 square feet down your street might just be the most profitable thing on the block. Now you know how it's done.